I stared at the leather suitcase sitting outside my motel room door like it might explode. It was old but expensive looking, the kind of luggage rich people carried in old movies. Dusty brown leather with brass corners and a handle wrapped in cracked material. But the thing that made my heart pound was the small gold plate on top engraved with words that made no sense. Asterisk Claire Montgomery asterisk my name. My full name. I looked down the motel hallway, empty, just flickering lights and the smell of old cigarettes. My hands shook as I dragged the suitcase inside and locked the door behind me. The lock barely worked. Nothing in the Sunset Motel worked properly, but I turned it anyway. The suitcase wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. I set it on my bed, which sagged in the middle and had springs that poked through the thin mattress. For a full minute I just stared at it. 3 months ago I wouldn't have been scared of a suitcase. 3 months ago I had a real life. I was Claire Montgomery, marketing director at Henderson and Associates. I had a house with a garden. I had a husband. I had a best friend. I had nice clothes and a car that didn't make weird noises and a future that looked bright. Then I came home early from work one Tuesday. I can still see it perfectly. Walking into my bedroom, the bedroom I decorated with curtains I'd picked out, and finding Derek tangled up in our sheets with Bethany, my husband, my best friend since college, in my bed. The divorce happened fast. Too fast. Derek's lawyer was like a shark, and I'd been too heartbroken to think straight. Turns out the house was only in Derek's name. Years ago, when we first bought it, he'd convinced me to let him handle all the paperwork because he was in real estate and knew what he was doing. I'd signed papers without reading them carefully because I trusted him. That trust cost me everything. The house went to Derek. My lawyer, the cheap one I could barely afford, said I had no case. Then Derek started making phone calls. He knew people at my company. He knew people everywhere. Suddenly, rumors started spreading that I was unstable, that I'd had a breakdown at work, that I couldn't be trusted with important clients. I was fired 2 weeks after the divorce finalized. No house, no job, no savings because everything had been in our joint account. And Derek had emptied it the day I moved out. His lawyer said that was legal too. I ended up here, the Sunset Motel. It cost $47 a night, and it was the only place I could afford. My room was tiny, just a bed, a bathroom with brown water stains, and a mini fridge that hummed so loudly I couldn't sleep. The walls were thin. I could hear everything happening in the rooms next to mine. Crying, fighting, lives falling apart just like mine. Last week I ran into Derek and Bethany at the grocery store. I was buying ramen noodles, the cheap kind, 10 for $1. They were buying steaks and wine. Bethany wore my old life on her face, expensive makeup, confident smile, diamond earrings. Derek saw me and actually laughed. "Claire, wow, you look different." I was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. My hair was greasy because the motel shower barely worked. "How are you doing?" Bethany asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We've been worried about you. You'll never rise again," Derek said quietly so only I could hear. "You're nothing without me, you never were." I'd left my cart right there in the aisle and walked out. Now I had $47 left to my name. The motel manager, Mrs. Chen, had knocked on my door yesterday asking for the $200 I owed in back rent. I'd pretended I wasn't home, and now this suitcase. I took a deep breath and flipped the brass latches. They opened with a soft click. Inside was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Stacks of $100 bills, neat and organized, filled most of the suitcase. My hands trembled as I pulled one stack out. A paper band around it read $10,000. I counted the stacks, 3 of them, $30,000. Underneath the money was a plane ticket. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. First class, Boston, tomorrow at 2 p.m. The name on the ticket, Claire Montgomery. My vision blurred with tears. This had to be a mistake or a joke or a trap. Then I saw the note. It was on thick cream-colored paper, the expensive kind. The handwriting was elegant, done with a real pen, not a ballpoint. "Dear Claire asterisk, this is just travel money. The real fortune is waiting at this address. 447 Berkeley Street, Boston, Massachusetts. Your appointment is scheduled for 2:00 p.m. the day after tomorrow. All will be explained. Come alone." Below that was a phone number with a Boston area code. I read it 5 times, then 10 times. The words didn't change. I pulled out my phone. Screen was cracked and I was 2 months behind on the bill and searched the address. It was a law office. Ashford and Associates, a fancy building in an expensive part of Boston. None of this made sense. I didn't know anyone named Ashford. I'd never been to Boston. I had no rich relatives who could have died and left me money. My parents had passed away years ago and they'd had nothing but debt. I picked up one of the stacks of money. It felt real. I held it up to the light from my window. The bills looked genuine, $30,000. A first-class plane ticket, an address in Boston. I thought about Derek's words, "You'll never rise again." Asterisk. I thought about my empty stomach because I'd only eaten ramen for 3 days straight. I thought about Mrs. Chen and the $200 I owed her. I thought about the $47 in my bank account and no idea how I'd survive next week. Then I looked back at the note at those words. The real fortune is waiting. I didn't know who sent this, I didn't know why. It could be dangerous, it could be a scam, it could be anything. But it was also the first spark of hope I'd felt since the day my life exploded. I sat on my sagging bed holding that note, surrounded by more money than I'd seen in months, and made a decision. Tomorrow I was going to Boston. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone breaking into my room and stealing the suitcase. I kept getting up to check that the door was locked, that the money was still there, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. At 3:00 a.m. I finally called the phone number on the note. A recording answered, professional, calm. "You've reached the offices of Ashford and Associates. Our business hours are Monday through Friday 9:00 a.m. to 5:00 p.m. If this is regarding an appointment with Mr. Harold Ashford, please press 1. I pressed 1. Your appointment is confirmed for 2:00 p.m. at 447 Berkeley Street. Please bring valid identification. If you need to reschedule, please call during business hours." Then it disconnected. I sat there in the dark, my heart hammering. It was real. The office was real. The appointment was real, but that didn't tell me why. As the sun came up through my dirty motel window, I made a list of everyone I'd ever known who might do something like this. The list was short. My parents were dead. I had no siblings. My college roommate had moved to Australia years ago. My co-workers from Henderson and Associates had all stopped returning my calls after I was fired. There was literally no one in my life who had this kind of money or any reason to give it to me. At 8:00 a.m. I took the longest shower I'd taken in weeks. The water was barely warm and the pressure was weak, but I scrubbed every inch of myself. I washed my hair twice with the tiny motel soap because I'd run out of shampoo days ago. Then I faced my next problem: clothes. Everything I owned was in a garbage bag in the corner. Sweatpants, stained shirts, one pair of jeans with a hole in the knee. Nothing appropriate for a meeting at a fancy law office in Boston. I took $500 from one of the stacks. My hands shook as I did it, like I was stealing, and walked to the discount store 3 blocks away. I found a simple black dress on clearance for $30, a pair of black flats for $20, some basic makeup for $15. In the store bathroom, I changed into my new clothes and tried to fix my hair. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked almost normal, almost like the old Claire, almost like someone who hadn't been living in a motel eating ramen, wondering if she'd ever have a real life again. I walked to Mrs. Chen's office and knocked on the door. She opened it, looking surprised. Mrs. Chen was a small woman, maybe 60, with grey hair and tired eyes. She'd been kind to me when I first arrived, but lately she'd been asking for the money I owed her. "Claire," she said, "I was going to come find you today. You owe $200, I said. "I know, I have it." I handed her the cash. Her eyes widened. "And here's for the next week," I added, giving her another $350. "I'm going away for a few days, but I'll be back." Mrs. Chen counted the money slowly, like she couldn't believe it was real. "Where did you?" "I got a job opportunity." I lied. "In Boston. It might turn into something good." She smiled then, a real smile. "I'm glad." "Honey, you've had a rough time. You deserve something good." I almost cried right there in her doorway. The airport was strange. I hadn't flown in over a year, not since the divorce. Derek and I used to take trips, weekend getaways to beach resorts, visits to wine country. We'd always flown economy and complained about the cramped seats. Now I was holding a first-class ticket. The security line moved slowly. I kept touching my purse, making sure my ID was still there, that the ticket was still real. Part of me expected someone to stop me and say there had been a mistake, that the ticket was fake, that I didn't belong here. But I made it through security. I found my gate. And when they called for first-class boarding, I walked down the jet bridge with my heart pounding. The seat was like nothing I'd experienced. Wide, comfortable leather. A flight attendant offered me champagne before we even took off. I said yes because I couldn't remember the last time anyone had offered me anything. As the plane lifted into the air, I watched my city get smaller below me. Somewhere down there was the Sunset Motel, my tiny room with the broken lock and the humming mini fridge, the grocery store where Derek had told me I'd never rise again, all of it shrinking, disappearing. I pulled out the note and read it again. The real fortune is waiting at this address asterisk, and then something clicked in my mind. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. 7 years ago, I was at a coffee shop near my office. I was waiting for Derek. We were meeting for lunch. A woman was sitting at the table next to mine, older, maybe in her 60s, well-dressed, reading a newspaper. She'd stood up to leave, taken 2 steps, and collapsed. I remember screaming for help, kneeling next to her. Her skin was grey and she wasn't breathing right. Someone called 911 while I held her hand and told her to stay with me to keep breathing. That help was coming. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics said she'd had a heart attack. They said if she'd been alone, she might have died. I rode with her to the hospital, stayed until her family arrived, visited her the next day and the day after that. She was in room 447, I remember, because it was the same as my office number. Her name was Evelyn. I never caught her last name. She'd thanked me over and over, said I'd saved her life. I'd brushed it off because anyone would have done the same thing. After she was discharged, I never saw her again. Could Evelyn be connected to this? The flight attendant interrupted my thoughts. Miss, we'll be landing in 20 minutes. Can I get you anything? I shook my head, my mind racing. When we landed, a man in a black suit was holding a sign with my name on it. Not a taxi driver, a professional driver with a nice car. He drove me through Boston streets I'd never seen before. Beautiful old buildings, tree-lined roads, the kind of neighborhood where successful people lived. We stopped in front of a tall building made of brick and glass. The sign read, Ashford and Associates. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaking. The driver handed me my small bag. Mr. Ashford is expecting you on the 3rd floor. Good luck, Miss Montgomery. I walked through the glass doors into a lobby with marble floors and chandeliers. An elevator took me to the 3rd floor. A receptionist smiled and said, Claire Montgomery, Mr. Ashford is ready for you. She led me down a hallway to a wooden door, knocked twice. A voice inside said, come in. I walked into an office filled with law books and elegant furniture. Behind a massive desk sat a man in his 70s with white hair and kind eyes. He stood extending his hand. Miss Montgomery, I'm Harold Ashford. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss about my sister Evelyn. Harold Ashford had the kind of face that made you trust him immediately. Warm eyes, a gentle smile. He reminded me of the grandfather I'd never had. Please sit, he said again, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. I sat down, gripping my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. The office smelled like old books and expensive wood polish. Sunlight streamed through tall windows behind him. I imagine you have many questions, Harold said, settling into his own chair. But before I explain everything, I need to confirm something. 7 years ago, you were at a cafe called Brewer's on Main Street. A woman collapsed. Do you remember that day? My heart skipped. Yes, her name was Evelyn. She had a heart attack. Harold nodded slowly. My sister, Evelyn Ashford, you saved her life that day. I just stayed with her until the ambulance came, I said quietly. Anyone would have done the same thing, but they didn't, Harold replied. There were 12 other people in that cafe. Most of them walked past her. One person took a video on their phone. You were the only one who helped. You rode with her to the hospital. You visited her twice. You brought her flowers. I'd forgotten about the flowers, cheap daisies from the hospital gift shop. Miss Montgomery, may I call you Claire? I nodded. Claire, my sister spent her entire life building a business empire. She started with nothing and created something remarkable, but she was also very particular about people. She trusted very few of them. He paused, his fingers steepled together. That day in the cafe changed her perspective. She told me that when she was lying on that floor, unable to breathe, certain she was dying, you held her hand. You told her she was going to be okay. You had no idea who she was. You didn't know she was wealthy. You gained absolutely nothing from helping her. It was the right thing to do, I said. Exactly. Harold smiled. That's precisely what she said you'd say. After she recovered, Evelyn hired a private investigator, not to intrude on your life but to understand who you were. She followed your career. She was impressed by your work ethic, your kindness to colleagues, your integrity. My chest felt tight. Evelyn had been watching me for 7 years. Harold opened a folder on his desk. When my sister's health began to decline last year, she knew her time was limited. She never married, never had children. I'm her only living relative besides a nephew who hasn't spoken to her in a decade. She made a very specific will and you are the primary beneficiary. The room tilted slightly. I don't understand, Claire. My sister left you a substantial inheritance. But first, let me explain what happened to you recently. Evelyn's investigator informed her about your divorce, the loss of your job, your situation at the motel. She was heartbroken. She wanted to help immediately, but she passed away 6 months ago. Everything had to go through probate. It took time to locate you to process the legal requirements. How much? I whispered. Harold pulled out several documents. $4,200,000 in liquid assets, stocks, bonds, and cash accounts. I couldn't breathe. Additionally, he continued, you inherit a property, a brownstone here in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. It's been fully renovated. Current market value is approximately $3 million. The numbers were so large they didn't feel real. Finally, you receive a 40% ownership stake in Ashford Hospitality Group. My sister built a chain of boutique hotels across New England. Your share generates approximately $300,000 annually in passive income. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Harold stood and walked to the window. I know this is overwhelming. Believe me, I argued with Evelyn about this decision. I told her she barely knew you. I suggested she leave everything to charity, but she was adamant. She said that character reveals itself in crisis, and you revealed yours when you helped a stranger without expecting anything in return. I can't accept this. I heard myself say, it's too much. I didn't do anything to deserve. There is a condition, Harold interrupted, turning back to face me. Of course there was. Nothing this good came without strings attached. Evelyn believed strongly in paying kindness forward. To receive the full inheritance, you must use a portion of it to create either a foundation or a business venture that helps women who have lost everything. Women in situations similar to where you were. You have 1 year to establish it and show genuine effort and commitment. He handed me a document. If you refuse the condition or fail to fulfill it, the entire estate goes to various charities that my sister designated. But if you accept and complete the requirement, everything becomes fully yours with no further obligations. I stared at the paper. The words blurred together. You don't have to decide this moment, Harold said gently. Take time to think about it, but I'll need an answer within 48 hours. What kind of foundation? I asked. That's entirely up to you. Evelyn trusted your judgment. It could be housing assistance, job training, legal aid, or something else entirely, as long as it genuinely helps women rebuild their lives. I thought about the Sunset Motel, about Mrs. Chen, about the woman I'd heard crying through the walls last night, about the defeated faces I saw every day in that place. I thought about Derek saying I'd never rise again. I'll do it, I said. Harold raised his eyebrows. You don't want time to consider? No, my voice was stronger now. I know exactly what kind of women need help. I was one of them 5 days ago. I'll create a foundation that provides temporary housing, job training, and legal assistance. I'll call it Second Sunrise. For the first time since I'd entered the office, Harold's professional demeanor cracked. He smiled broadly. Evelyn would have loved that name. He pulled out more papers. These are preliminary documents. We'll need to meet with financial advisors, set up accounts, transfer property deeds. For now, I can provide you with immediate access to $100,000 for living expenses while we process everything else. The rest will be available once you sign the final papers tomorrow. $100,000 for living expenses. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It came out half hysterical. Harold looked concerned. Are you all right? I had $47 last week, I managed to say between laughs that were turning into sobs. $47 and no idea how I'd eat next month, and now you're giving me $100,000 just for living expenses. You've been through a terrible ordeal, Harold said kindly. Take time to process this, take time to heal. He handed me an envelope. Here are keys to the brownstone. The address is 447 Berkeley Street, Unit B. I think you'll find it quite comfortable. 447, the same as Evelyn's hospital room number. I took the keys with trembling hands. Go see your new home, Harold said. Rest. Tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. come back here and we'll finalize everything. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? I have a home, I said, still not quite believing it. Apparently I have a brownstone. Harold called his driver to take me to the address. As I stood to leave, he said, Claire, one more thing. My sister left you a letter. I was instructed to give it to you after you accepted the inheritance. He handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in elegant handwriting. I held it carefully like it might disappear. The drive to 447 Berkeley Street took 15 minutes. When the car stopped, I looked up at a 4-story brownstone that took my breath away. It had original brick, tall windows with flower boxes and a bright blue door. This is mine, I whispered. The driver smiled. According to Mr. Ashford, yes, ma'am. I walked up the steps on shaking legs and put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened. Inside was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. The brownstone was like stepping into a dream. Hardwood floors gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The walls were painted soft cream and crown molding traced elegant lines across the ceiling. To my left was a living room with a fireplace, bookshelves built into the walls, and furniture that looked both expensive and comfortable. I walked through slowly, afraid to touch anything, afraid I'd wake up back in the motel. The kitchen had marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a window overlooking a small garden. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, each with their own bathroom. The master bedroom had a massive bed with white linens and windows that let in so much light I had to squint, but the best part was the rooftop. I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor and pushed open a door. A private rooftop garden stretched before me. There were plants in pots, a small table with chairs, and a view of the Boston skyline that made my throat tight. I sat down in one of the chairs and finally opened Evelyn's letter. Dear Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Harold has told you about the inheritance. I imagine you're confused, perhaps overwhelmed. Let me explain why I chose you. That day in the cafe I was alone. I'd spent 68 years building a business, making money, acquiring things, but when I couldn't breathe, when I thought I was dying, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that a stranger cared enough to hold my hand. You didn't know me, you didn't know I was wealthy, you helped because it was right. In a world where most people walk past suffering, you stopped, you stayed, you cared. I had my investigator follow your life because I needed to know if that kindness was real or just a lucky moment. Over 7 years I watched you succeed through hard work. I watched you treat people with respect. I watched you live with integrity. Then I watched your husband betray you. I watched your world fall apart. I watched you end up in that terrible motel and it broke my heart. I wanted to help immediately, but I was too sick. I knew I was dying, so I did the only thing I could. I put you in my will. The money is yours because you earned it through simple human decency. The condition exists not to control you, but because I believe you understand something most wealthy people never learn, that kindness multiplies when we share it. Build something beautiful. Claire, help others the way you helped me, and please live a life that makes you happy, you deserve it. With gratitude and affection. Evelyn Ashford. I cried on that rooftop until I had no tears left. For everything I'd lost, for everything I just gained, for a woman I barely knew who'd given me a second chance at life. When I finally stopped crying, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. I spent a week in Boston meeting with Harold's financial advisors. They explained investment strategies and trust funds and tax implications, numbers so large my brain couldn't process them. They set up accounts. They transferred the brownstone deed into my name. They made everything real. I started sketching plans for Second Sunrise. I researched non-profits, talked to lawyers about forming a foundation, and visited potential locations for a women's shelter. The work filled my days with meaning. But there was something I needed to do first. I needed to go back home, not to stay, but to face what I'd left behind. I still had things in the motel storage room. More than that, I needed to see Derek and Bethany one last time. Not for revenge, but to prove to myself that I'd survived, that I was more than the broken woman Derek said would never rise again. I booked a flight back and checked into the Grand Harbor Hotel, the nicest hotel in my old city. My room cost more per night than I used to make in a week. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had emailed me about some final divorce paperwork that needed signatures. I'd ignored it for weeks, but now I replied. I suggested we meet at Café Meridian, a place we used to go for Sunday brunch back when we were happy. He agreed immediately, probably thinking I was still desperate and broken. I spent an hour getting ready. I wore a navy dress I bought in Boston. Elegant but not flashy, I did my makeup carefully. I looked at myself in the hotel mirror and saw someone I recognized, the old Claire but stronger. The cafe was crowded when I arrived. Derek was already there sitting at a table by the window. He wore his expensive suit, the one he thought made him look important. When he saw me walk in, his expression shifted from smug confidence to confusion. I sat down across from him. "Claire," he said, recovering quickly. "You look different." "Hello, Derek," he stuttered me, trying to figure out what had changed. "New dress. Did you finally get a job?" Something like that. I pulled the divorce papers from my purse. "You said these needed signatures." He pushed them across the table. I read through them carefully, something I should have done the first time around. They were exactly what he'd said, final documentation, nothing hidden. I signed them and slid them back. "So, where are you working?" Derek asked. He was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the curiosity, the need to know. "I'm starting a foundation in Boston." He laughed. "A foundation? Claire, you need money to start a foundation." "What are you doing?" "Working reception at someone else's charity." "I'm running it," I said calmly. "It's called Second Sunrise. We'll provide housing and support for women who have lost everything." "That's nice," Derek said, his tone dripping with condescension. "A little volunteer project. That's good for you staying busy. But seriously, where are you living? Did you finally get out of that disgusting motel?" "I did, let me guess." "Some apartment with roommates. A brownstone actually in Boston." Derek's smile faltered. "You're renting a room in a brownstone?" "I own it." The smile disappeared completely. "What are you talking about?" "I own a four-story brownstone in Back Bay. It's quite beautiful. You'd hate it. There's too much natural light." Derek leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Where did you get money for that? Did you find some desperate boyfriend to take care of you?" "I inherited it," I said simply, "along with several $1 million and a business that generates substantial annual income." His face went pale. "Then read." "You're lying." "I'm not. That's impossible. You have no family, no one who would. 7 years ago I helped a woman who had a heart attack. She never forgot it. She left me her estate." Derek stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "How much?" "Enough that I'll never worry about money again." He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. People turned to look. "This is insane. You can't just. You were living in a motel. You had nothing. You were nothing." "You're right," I said, standing too. "I had nothing. But I was never nothing, Derek. I just forgot that for a while. You made me forget." "If you think this changes anything, it doesn't change the past," I interrupted. "You still betrayed me. You still destroyed our marriage. You still tried to ruin my life. But here's what it does change. I don't need you anymore. I don't need your approval or your money or your connections. I'm going to be fine. Better than fine." Derek's hands were shaking. "You got lucky, that's all this is, dumb luck." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll take it." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Derek, you said I'd never rise again." "You were wrong." I left him standing there, his face twisted with anger and disbelief. Outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air and smiled. There was one more stop I needed to make. The Sunset Motel looked exactly the same. Peeling paint, flickering neon sign. Sadness soaked into every brick. I found Mrs. Chen in her office doing paperwork. "Claire," she stood up, surprised. "I thought you were in Boston." "I am. I just came back to get my things and to give you this." I handed her an envelope. She opened it and gasped. Inside was $5,000 in cash. "Claire, I can't." "It's not for you," I said gently. "It's for the next woman who shows up here with nothing. The one who's scared and alone and doesn't know how she'll survive. Give her a week free. Give her time to breathe. Tell her things can get better." Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "You're a good person." "Someone was good to me once," I said. "I'm just passing it forward." I collected my garbage bag of belongings from the storage room. I donate them all and took one last look at room 12, where I'd spent the worst months of my life. Then I got in the taxi and went back to the hotel. That evening my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Miss Montgomery, this is Harold Ashford. Is everything okay? I'm afraid there's been a development." His voice was tense. "A relative of Evelyn's has come forward. My nephew Gerald, he's contesting the will. He claims Evelyn wasn't of sound mind when she made you the beneficiary. There will be a court hearing." My blood went cold. What does that mean? It means everything you've received might be taken away. I flew back to Boston the next morning. My hands shook the entire flight. Harold met me at his office looking tired, dark circles under his eyes, papers scattered across his usually neat desk. "Tell me everything," I said, sitting down. "Gerald Ashford is Evelyn's nephew. Her younger brother's son. He's 53 years old and hasn't spoken to Evelyn in over a decade. He appeared 2 days ago with a lawyer claiming the will is invalid." "On what grounds?" "He argues that Evelyn was mentally compromised when she made you the beneficiary, that you must have manipulated her somehow. He says the estate should go to him as her closest blood relative." I felt sick. "Can he do that?" "He can try. The hearing is scheduled for next week. We'll need to prove Evelyn was completely sound of mind and that her decision was made freely without coercion." "I barely knew her," I said quietly. "I helped her once 7 years ago." "That's it, I know, and that's actually our strongest argument. You had no ongoing relationship with her, no opportunity to manipulate her, but Gerald's lawyer is good. They'll paint you as a con artist who took advantage of a sick, lonely woman." I spent the next week preparing. Harold gathered Evelyn's medical records, showing perfect mental clarity up until her final days. He had the private investigators' reports proving Evelyn researched me thoroughly before making her decision. We had documentation of every choice she'd made, but I couldn't sleep. Every night I lay awake thinking about losing everything again. The brownstone, the money, second sunrise, all of it disappearing like it had never existed. The morning of the hearing, I put on my navy dress and tried to look confident. Harold met me at the courthouse steps. "Remember," he said quietly, "stay calm, answer questions honestly, don't let Gerald's lawyer provoke you." We walked into the courtroom together. Gerald Ashford sat at the other table with his lawyer. He was tall, well-dressed, with greying hair and cold eyes. When he looked at me, I saw pure contempt. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Patterson. She looked stern but fair. Gerald's lawyer went first. His name was Robert Chen, and he was everything Harold warned me about. Smooth, confident, dangerous. "Your Honor," Chen began, "this case is about a vulnerable elderly woman who was manipulated by a stranger. Gerald Ashford is Evelyn Ashford's only nephew, her closest living blood relative. Yet she left her entire fortune to Claire Montgomery, a woman she met briefly 7 years ago. This defies logic unless we consider that Mrs. Ashford was not of sound mind or that Miss Montgomery exploited her in some way. He painted a picture of me as calculating, a woman who helped someone once and then somehow convinced them to leave millions of dollars. He suggested I'd tracked Evelyn down, befriended her during her illness, whispered poison in her ear about her family. I felt everyone's eyes on me judging. Then it was Harold's turn. He stood slowly, gathering his papers with deliberate calm. "Your Honor, my sister Evelyn Ashford was the sharpest person I've ever known. She built a hotel empire from nothing. She made sound business decisions until the day she died. I have her medical records here showing full cognitive function." He presented document after document, brain scans, psychological evaluations, letters Evelyn had written in her final months, all showing clear, logical thinking. Furthermore, Harold continued, "Miss Montgomery had no contact with my sister after the initial incident 7 years ago. She didn't know Evelyn's last name, she didn't know she was wealthy. There was no opportunity for manipulation." Then Harold did something I didn't expect. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a video recording." A screen was set up. The lights dimmed slightly and there was Evelyn. She sat in a hospital bed, but her eyes were bright and alert. The date stamp showed 3 months before she died. "My name is Evelyn Ashford," she said clearly. "I'm making this recording to explain my will in case anyone questions my decisions." My throat tightened. "I'm leaving the majority of my estate to Claire Montgomery. I know this will seem strange to people who don't know the full story. Gerald, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but you haven't called me in 5 years. You didn't visit when I was sick. The only time I heard from you was when you needed money for your business ventures." Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Claire Montgomery saved my life 7 years ago," Evelyn continued. "But more than that, she showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. She didn't know who I was. She gained nothing from helping me. That kind of character is rare. I had her investigated because I needed to know if that kindness was real or just a lucky moment. Over 7 years, I watched her live with integrity, work hard, treat people well. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her expression intense. When I learned about her divorce, about losing everything, I wanted to help immediately, but I was too sick. So I did what I could. I put her in my will. This is my choice, made with a completely clear mind. Claire earned this inheritance through simple human decency. If Gerald wants to contest this, it only proves he's exactly the person I thought he was, someone who values money over people. The video ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Patterson looked at Gerald. "Mr. Ashford, would you like to address your aunt's statement?" Gerald's lawyer whispered urgently to him. Gerald stood, his face red. "My aunt was clearly influenced by what?" The judge interrupted. "She just stated clearly that she made this decision independently." "Do you have any evidence of mental incompetence? Any medical records contradicting what we've just seen?" "No, but do you have any proof that Miss Montgomery had contact with your aunt beyond the initial incident?" Gerald's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we believe belief isn't evidence, Mr. Chen." Judge Patterson looked at her notes. "I've reviewed all the documentation. I've seen Mrs. Ashford's medical records. I've watched her clearly explain her reasoning. Unless you have concrete evidence of manipulation or mental incompetence, I'm prepared to make my ruling." Gerald and his lawyer had a whispered conversation. Finally, Chen said, "We have no additional evidence at this time, Your Honor." Judge Patterson nodded. "Then I rule in favor of the defendant. Evelyn Ashford's will stands as written. Claire Montgomery is the rightful beneficiary of the estate. Case dismissed." The gavel came down. I couldn't breathe. Harold squeezed my shoulder. "It's over. You won." Gerald stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer following. As he passed my table, he stopped. "You got lucky," he hissed. "You didn't earn any of this." I looked at him calmly. I thought about what Evelyn had said in the video, about character, about kindness. "You're right that I didn't earn your aunt's money," I said quietly. "But I earned her respect by treating her like a human being when she was scared and alone. Maybe if you'd done the same, we wouldn't be here." His face twisted with anger, but he had nothing to say. He left. Outside the courthouse, Harold shook my hand formally, then pulled me into a hug. "Evelyn would be so proud of you. I wish I'd known her better." I said, "You knew the part of her that mattered most." 3 months later, I stood in a renovated building in downtown Boston. The sign above the door read, "Second Sunrise Foundation." 5 women sat in the conference room. They looked how I'd felt in that motel room, defeated, scared, unsure if life would ever get better. "Welcome," I said. "My name is Claire Montgomery. 3 months ago I was living in a motel with $47 to my name. My husband had left me, I'd lost my job, I didn't think I'd survive." I saw recognition in their eyes, they understood. "This program can't fix everything," I continued. "But it can give you time, resources, support, a chance to figure out who you want to be next. You're not here because you failed, you're here because life knocked you down and you're brave enough to get back up." One woman raised her hand. She was young, maybe 25. "Why are you doing this? What do you get out of it?" I thought about Evelyn, about that day in the cafe, about kindness multiplying when we share it. 7 years ago I helped someone without knowing it would matter, I said. She never forgot. When I needed help, she gave me a chance I didn't expect and didn't think I deserved. I'm doing this because kindness isn't a transaction. It's a ripple. We're going to create a lot of ripples here. That evening I sat in my brownstone library, the room Evelyn had designed. I pulled out a journal and started writing. I wrote about Derek, about betrayal and loss, about the motel and the suitcase, about Harold and the hearing, about Evelyn's video and her gift, and finally about the future. The last thing I wrote was, "He said I'd never rise again." He was wrong. I didn't rise again, I rose higher. And this time I'm not alone. This time I'm bringing others with me. I closed the journal and walked to the window. The Boston skyline glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there were women who needed help. Women who'd lost everything and didn't know if they'd survive. I'd find them, I'd help them, I'd show them what Evelyn showed me, that one act of kindness can change everything. I smiled at